long time ago, in the early 1990s, I remember casually chatting with my father about politics. I had no real interest in such dull matters, but I was being polite in conversation. We were bemoaning the dismal method of voting someone to Parliament and trusting them for 4 years, while they were far away, out of view, with public resources and mostly unmonitored. And as my dad was walking away from the table, he asked, "Well, it's the best system we've got. What do you replace it with?" Of course, I had no idea what the answer was, but for some reason it stuck in my mind and has lingered there ever since. You know the problem as well as I do. We are here in 2020, just after the American presidential election held in November, and amid so much turmoil and controversy, there is as much doubt and mistrust as ever with regard to vote counting and election integrity. To be clear, there are thankfully many countries with a good reputation for fair elections, but there is a great deal of evidence that elections have been rigged down the years, and not just in the USA. The reason for all that doubt is that we, the public, cannot check and verify the voting system, let alone understand its mechanisms properly. Many would argue that it's deliberately set that way, in order to allow the establishment or authorities to tip the balance, so to speak, if things are not going their way in a given election count. Now, what amazes me is that with all the political turbulence, all the arguments and accusations flying between the right and the so-called left, nobody is ever talking about bringing in an electronic voting platform online, of course, one man, one vote, fully transparent and robust. So you might say, hey, that's impossible. How can you trust them? Technology can be rigged. Well, you can't trust them really, you see. That was why we had an election cycle in the first place, replacing candidates every few years, because we don't trust them to do the right thing over a long period. Power corrupts and all of that. We need to do it ourselves, and I believe taking control and putting this right will be influential in all aspects of life. In fact, I'm going to make a promise here. If you follow me in this little journey, there's an unexpected bonus at the end. But what about the election machines already in use in the US and said to be fraudulent? Not the same thing. Those machines do not give full visibility to all members of the public in real time and archive a permanent public record. They are operated out of sight from the public, and we frankly don't know what's happening. Think of all the online platforms we have today to verify and measure so many things in our world, from city air quality to banking, up to the minute and accurate. But mention of this topic, and suddenly the prospect of applying this wonderful technology to the cause of election integrity has evaporated. Gone are all our debating faculties. It seems we suffer amnesia wall to wall. If we can have accurate online platforms for every other aspect of our lives, we certainly can harness it for elections. Because if we can't orchestrate solid election ballots, our fundamental claims to democracy are precarious at best. If the voting systems are fraudulent, it does not set a good omen about the rest of society. So let me underscore with examples here. You don't have to try too hard for real-world instances of what I'm talking about. eBay, Facebook, if you can trust them. And an obvious example here, Amazon.com. Amazon, of course, is a huge online shopping experience and will be familiar to so many people nowadays. So let us say, just to get started, imagine, perhaps even naively, being able to use the Amazon platform for our election voting. In terms of integrity, what happens when you make a purchase on Amazon? Say you order a book on the website. When you check out and pay for the item, what follows is highly critical in order to complete the transaction. The correct amount of money must be taken from the correct bank account, in this case yours, and the sum gets transferred to the correct merchant's account, Amazon's account. With that part over, the item gets shipped, and finally, it must arrive at the correct postal address, your address. At that point, The main transaction is deemed to be complete, your precious item has been delivered, and both sides sign off on the deal. Note that if there are errors at any of these critical stages, we would have red flags and trouble, leading to accusations, refunds, etc. A bad customer experience, as it were. I've no idea what percentage of Amazon's transactions malfunction. You would need to put that question to Jeff Bezos, frankly. But I do know that it has to be very low. Otherwise, the company's reputation would be damaged, and the business would likely collapse overnight. In the area of customer transactions, at least, Amazon have clearly set up a reliable machine with high integrity because they have to. If such online stores can handle everyday complications so intrepidly, couldn't the same be done for voting systems? Now, at this point, you might be thinking, well, yes, buying items over the internet is clear and tangible, but if we use such platforms for voting, well, the vote just goes off into the ether, right? Sure, I might get an electronic receipt email sent, but with millions of people voting in a national election, how are we going to verify what happens at the other end? Whether my vote is actually counted or not? Like, we can't exactly log on to the government computers and check what's happening, can we? Actually, I would argue that you ultimately should be allowed such thorough access, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, you may already be getting some idea of what is possible with technology, but to illustrate how we have already done far more complicated and critical things a long time ago in terms of data processing, let's turn to my favourite example to illustrate computer error checking. Let's take a trip. Cast your mind back to 1983 or thereabouts, when the Sony and Philips corporations, in a joint effort, pioneered the humble CD or compact disc player. This, of course, was revolutionary and super fantastic.
Right? Wrong. Just when music lovers thought they had assembled the best audio systems money could buy, along comes a new technological development. It's called the compact disc, or CD. Unlike the conventional vinyl long-playing record, the compact disc is a little under 4 3/4 inches across. Only one side is used, but can store more than an hour's worth of music.
For the first time, music was produced in digital format on a small plastic disc. This replaced vinyl records and audio cassette tape recordings, giving pure musical sound with no surface scratches. Ghostly yet beautiful to behold at the time, and even now, it's a revelation. I managed to pick up my first portable CD player in New York in 1986. It was the Sony Discman, as I recall, and was beautifully made, an astonishing piece of work in terms of electronic large-scale integration in its day. By the way, this CD standard has had a great run in the music industry. You can still buy CDs today. Let's examine what actually happens when you play a music CD. When the disc spins, it is read by a laser which detects a serial stream of ones and zeros in the surface. These bits are indicated by the presence or absence of tiny grooves or pits in the plastic. With great formulation, the embedded electronics and software breaks up this continuous stream into blocks of 16 bits at a time. It stacks those into big tables, with each row being used to compute the value, given an eventual point in the graph of the final sound wave which is being reconstructed. But instead of printing this graph to paper or an oscilloscope, it gets sent out to amplifiers and over our speakers so we can hear the music. A spectacular piece of work by computers in real time. If I had to manually do such processing and transcription of all those tables just to listen to my first CD back in '86, I'd still probably be there working after all these years. But wait, there's a problem. What if there is some error with all those billions of ones and zeros? What if there are mistakes in the counting, so to speak? Maybe a defect in the plastic grooves. Surely there are going to be some errors in all that busy, high-speed processing. Well, yes, that posed a problem for engineers because you would be having the wrong value extracted from the tables, producing the wrong graph, resulting in unlistenable errors in the sound, even possibly missing music here or there. By comparison, the needle of the old vinyl record actually sat physically on the original graph, so to speak, going up and down the hills as it were, tracking and reflecting the sounds directly onto your speakers. So even if you had all the pops and scratches, it still stuck with the program and you had the recognizable music pretty reliably. But the computerization at the heart of the CD knows nothing about the world of sounds. It only deals with ones and zeros, vast tables of them. And if those numerical values are not correct on the table, you don't get the right value being drawn on the graph, resulting in the wrong sound being outputted and unlistenable to the ears of the customer. Needless to say, that would have spelled big trouble for the industry. So to solve this, the CD player, in addition to its already staggering workload, employs wickedly cool cross-checking similar to the CRC or cyclic redundancy checking algorithms, but more advanced and titled the Cross-Interleave Reed-Solomon Code. This ran incredible block checking of the tables read off the disc, conceptually like when you use a spreadsheet to check the horizontal rows and vertical columns to come out with the correct amount in the totals box, at which point you know everything is correct. And all this error checking, double checking and bean counting, so to speak, is being done in real time with the listener knowing nothing of the chaos behind the scenes. Doing the numbers, on an 80-minute CD, about 5.6 billion bits of information can be processed with no errors detected in the audio. In practice, the relatively few errors are corrected. So please, let it never be said that the correct counting of a mere 200 million ballot votes in a single election day is impossible. Now, shall we get back to our little problem? Yes, the task of making an online voting system that can be seen and cross-checked by all members of the public in real time, so that by close of voting at midnight, all counting has automatically been done, the winner is clear and there is no dispute. People can check all the data for the rest of their lives if they want. Election day is an event that is fully recorded and fully visible for all time. That way, if it did not happen in the public domain, it did not happen at all, period. So let's do the thought experiment. This is how it could and should go on a given election day for every member of the public, given such an online voting ballot platform. When the nation votes online from early morning through to midnight, our particular Joe Public of interest gets to cast his vote at, say, 11:03 in the morning. He logs onto the official platform. He has been already provided with a security key, typically a 64-byte key, and this is unique to him. Every citizen has been given such a key. When presented with the correct screen, he casts his vote and receives digital acknowledgement, which can include email. But he can also record a screenshot of the vote for immediate downloading from the software, as sometimes email is known to fail. Now, every citizen can have various real-time views and queries of all voting activity in the system, across the nation, the entire system. This includes live terminal summaries of every vote as it happens. This can run throughout the day and even be recorded if one so wishes. And there can be different types of queries, even run simultaneously, perhaps for an individual region or state. But what happens if you should lose internet connectivity at any stage? No problem. In addition to live summary streams, every single vote generates a non-writable secure file in the system. This can be downloaded and examined by anyone, each individual voting file for the entire population if you want. If a file does not get generated, the person has not voted yet, and of course they may decide not to vote. The final turnout will only be determined on the stroke of midnight. So this implies that if a person has cast his vote, he will have confirmation on the screen, client side, and also on the official database that he can examine, the server side. If there is a mismatch in this respect, if there is no back-end file generated signalling a vote, there will be a red flag raised, spelling trouble. So his on-screen confirmation of the vote only gets done after the back-end generation part of the process. The individual voter corresponding to that file will have all access permission, which can reveal his identity and the IP address from the location where he cast his vote. So his key works uniquely on the file. If it is somebody else's file he examines, he will have limited or metadata access, but this will still include details of region, which candidate was voted for, and or voting preference order details as appropriate, a timestamp to show when the vote was cast, etc. If you wish to, you could even download the entire zipped folder of all votes in the election for postmortems at any time. So let's say a person runs an online block check or even downloads all the files at a certain time of the day, like 2 p.m. say. Somebody else across the country runs a check at maybe 5 in the evening. Both file listing snapshots will have identical details up to the 2 p.m. point. The 5 p.m. check will simply continue the listing and will be a longer file. The midnight file, of course, the one generated at midnight, will be the last listing and will include all vote files corresponding to the entire national election. As before, no matter who runs it on the night or retrospectively, it will give the same results. I want to emphasize here the distinction between the generated snapshot lists of voting files and actual generated voting file, one for every person who votes. Both of these will be available. Needless to say, there will be tests that are run to ensure integrity, like only one file corresponding to each key or voter. Red flags under such a system will be rare. All that cross-checking tends to work out. Rules will have to be agreed publicly as to what error is deemed to be a showstopper and what is a minor problem. If, for example, a given computer server is overloaded, there can be a rule to add extra time at the end of the day to push the last vote past midnight, but there will be a limited number of unexpected anomalies allowed, otherwise the election is declared null and void. In order to avoid showstoppers and draw up bulletproof rules, we do extensive testing over time. And this includes pre-election testing and even mock simulation by the public, where everyone can test the system by participating in a fictitious selection the day beforehand with a completely made up set of candidates' names. Now, how would we roll this out in the real world? We certainly have the technology, but we need programming, configuration and testing. What we do not have is widespread organisation or governmental conformity. Let me start by saying that you do not consult government or congressman on how to go about this. This needs to be organic and founded in the community. So we look to develop such a platform as an ongoing public engagement or hobby, like an online gaming community, maybe like fantasy football. People sign up and sign in initially to version 1, and with each subsequent revision as the software gets improved. As the system grows and gets more sophisticated, I would predict it would soon outperform any traditional voting system very quickly, probably even before the beta version of software arrives. You will shortly see the reason for my confidence in this. The more people participate, the deeper the understanding there will be of the process. A single experiment is worth 1,000 conversations. Of course, this total visibility approach can be extensive. Public mapping and tracking of all election servers and even internet cameras on all premises involved. It's all possible. While in this shadow mode of our operation, perhaps for a number of years, it will even be used to provide reliable polls during election cycles. Then at some point, and with groundswell pressure from the public, the national legislation or constitution document gets amended to bring the new electronic voting into use and duly phase out traditional means. If we consider all the platforms being developed worldwide and all the money and resources involved, from gaming community to business and government platforms, surely we can direct some funding towards this project. But remember, all changes to the platform during its development are shown into the public on a registry or change log from the word go. For instance, every government worker assigned to the platform and with the admin privileges will be recorded every time they log into the system and from wherever physical location. The real-time log grows by the day and gets archived for immediate public reading. We take a page from the book of law enforcement and capture all activity and events immediately to capture the evidence, to preserve it. It is based on a culture of absolute verification. What we have in this vision is a case where the public takes control of the public ballot mechanism. The knock-on effect of such a thing is not to be underestimated. Don't forget, we are not just talking about presidential elections, but the elections of all members of Parliament and Congress, local and national. A paradigm change would indeed present a new day for society. But there's something else that lies waiting in the shadows, something big. If the public has full control of the national election system, why stop there? Why not branch out the system to apply to Congress as well, where the entire voting population gets to vote for every proposed law or proposed change in any law? It's not that the members of Parliament would lose their vote so much as there would be no Congress or no members of Parliament. They would instead be civil servants employed to draft and amend the laws for the people. The job of the President or Prime Minister would be more of an executive's job to manage emergency or short-term situations. The decision he makes would have to be ratified by the same voting public after a short time. So, for example, imagine a rule being introduced by the President to manage the COVID-19 situation. It would need an extension after a short period to be authorised by the people, and eventually might need to become permanent law and would need to go through the relevant process, just like every other law, ending in a public vote by the people. No exceptions. So what are the immediate implications of life without an active Parliament or Congress? First of all, with no such thing as members casting their votes, we have no lobbies corrupting government by flooding them with cash. Now the only people that big industries can bribe are basically the public, who each have the same voting power. They can of course pay media outlets to carry persuasive adverts and so on. But if the people think the media are excessive or unbalanced, guess who controls the laws? Secondly, whether it's modification of some regional traffic law or voting on a major national tax law, a sex law, a drug law, we now have thousands and millions of concerned people voting for or against the proposed change. A big difference from 250 paid off politicians. Incidentally, as we move along the path to ratification, there are rules and constraints that are implemented along the way, and those constraints are set by, you guessed it, the people. For example, to pass a given law, it must achieve its quota of yes votes. We cannot simply have a dozen fat cats proposing a law and a dozen of their cronies voting for it, thereby getting it passed quietly. That dog won't hunt. The public are watching, and the system has already been designed to prevent such shallow power brokering. So, when we forevermore speak of support for an idea or law, we really do mean people getting online and voting for it. And we mean nothing else. There will be no other method allowed. Although I have a lot to say about the mechanism of this, I should just give a quick illumination of the inner workings here. How do we decide which laws should be proposed? We have fundamentally two types of tickets involved in the lawmaking cycle, namely requests and ratifications. In the request phase, interesting laws are put forward from the integrated forum in which the public has full participation. With sufficient interest in the ratings, an item gets pooled for drafting. This is done by the civil servants. First, the request document outlines the need for the proposed law, giving details to be included and a full explanation of what is desired. This is now passed or sent back for revision by the public vote. Now it goes back for actual law drafting, which starts the ratification process. This is where things are cross-checked for conflicts with other laws, national and international. And when the draft is complete, it gets sent back for public voting and ratification, and in some cases it might be a temporary law with a trial run and will be up for renewal after a year or two. And yes, the public will have to vote on it again. I should also point out that the idea of a 900-page bill being read by the public before vote will not be tolerated. For easy digestion, it should be more like a page or two with as many appendages as needed, pages upon pages of them if need be. And on this note, part of the conversion to a virtual Congress will involve drafting readable summaries of existing laws for public consumption. As an offspin, we are likely to have new jobs created in the public sector dedicated to working on this. The public will grow much more familiar with laws, will find much more reward, but increased public involvement would mean sustained public sharpness. We would be forever repairing and improving the system. So I like to think of this as the opposite of Orwellian systems, whereby the people exercise complete control and phase out government as we know it. Of course, we will have doubters and smear tactics, but when we move into this territory, we will improve swiftly. For those who think it will never be done or is too radical, perhaps they are speaking of the past. I'm not. I'm dreaming of the future. Airplanes were a radical idea back in 1905, but after 30 years, commercial aviation became a reality. Even our system of today was introduced after centuries of authoritarian rule by kings. And with regard to the ensuing turmoil, it's going to happen anyway. In science, we keep what works best and eliminate the lesser practice. This is not about technology so much, that's already demonstrated, but more about an idea whose time has come. I would like to reiterate that if you find yourself consulting existing government on this, you have already lost your footing. This is truly for and by the people. Not only that, if we wish to preserve democracy in even the broadest terms, we are actually going to have no choice about closing elected Congress and replacing it with a public voting platform. We have to do it. In the age of looming corporations, this is far more relevant than ever. Either we use democracy or we lose it.